or two. And also he's the author of a new book that just came out today, which is on the public agenda, Essays for Change. If you'd like to look at these books afterwards, you're welcome to do that. So John, again, it's an honor to have you with us. And
thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank Phil, and I want to thank Paul Peckham and the Walpole Peace and Justice Group, and the Walpole Public Library and its librarian, Jimmy Remelek, thank you for pronouncing it right, for hosting me tonight. Well, the topic is issues raised by the Jewish state in Palestine. And of course, one of the issues, the central issues that is raised by the Jewish state in Palestine is whether there should be one. And I'm going to get into that issue tonight. But first, I'd like to ask people to consider what might relations between ordinary Jews and ordinary Palestinians, non-Jews, Arabs, in the Palestine, Israel part of the world, the Middle East, what might relations between ordinary Jews and non-Jews be like if powerful governments and elites who manipulate people, power and control of institutions, if they were not in the picture? And to shed some light on that, I want to read to you a newspaper article from the Boston Globe from the year 2001. The headline is, in Palestinian Village, Anger at Israeli's Death. This is an unusual article, not so much because what it reports is unusual, I believe, but because of the fact that it was reported at all. We don't usually get these reports. The dateline is Yellen, a town in the West Bank. This village of 6,500 people yesterday was the rarest of places in the bitter struggle that has convulsed Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories for 11 months. A place where one side cried over a death on the other. Yellen's, that's the town, Yellen's tears were shed for Amos Tagori, a 60-year-old Israeli cab driver, beloved here for his affinity for Arab culture and his generosity towards his many Palestinian friends. Tagori, a Jew who moved to Israel from Libya, was murdered Thursday morning as he waited for a breakfast of eggs and beef sausage that was being prepared by his young Palestinian friend, Morsi Amira. A masked gunman walked up to Tagori's table at Fast Food, the name of a restaurant that Amira and his brother opened just a week ago in their home village because they were no longer able to reach their old jobs in Israel because of Israeli policies. The gunman shot Tagori multiple times at close range and escaped through a field across the street. Tagori, who died on the spot, was buried yesterday, the victim of an apparent attempt by extremists to radicalize a Palestinian village that has been sitting out the Intifada. The whole village is angry, Amira said yesterday in the living room of the cool stone house that is home to him, his parents, 8 brothers, and 3 sisters. The people of this village spit on this. It is an act of cowardice. As the call to prayer for the Muslim Sabbath echoed through the shuttered storefronts of the town, Amira's mother, Rame Amira, 44, asked bitterly, why they attack a 60-year-old man who is helping us? And this is interesting what she said next. Why not attack soldiers? These people are not pacifists. And these people are saying in this woman's voice that the soldiers of the Israeli army that oppressed them are a legitimate target, but not this taxi driver. She answered her own question. They killed him to create problems so that people will support the Intifada, she said. They think if they kill him, the Israelis crack down, the village will be radicalized. I hope it will not happen. Local youth and family members crowded around yesterday as Morsi Amira delivered a eulogy. It was unlike anything heard here since the early days of the strife when Israeli youth mourned the shooting by Israeli soldiers of an Arab youth who had participated with them in a peace-building program in Maine. Amos was one of us. He knew our culture, said Amira, his face red and puffy from crying. If he prayed with us, he would have been one of us completely. This is a bigger loss for us than for the Jews. He was a pacifist man, and he helped people here a lot, Amira said grimly, smoking one cigarette after another. He was not rich, but he drove the farmers to sell their cactus fruit and figs in Israel. And if they didn't have enough money to pay until after the market, he accepted that. For the past 4 or 5 years, he was coming every day, 22-year-old Palestinian said. Sometimes the Israeli soldiers would stop him at the checkpoint, warning him it was dangerous to enter Palestinian-dominated areas. But he argued with them, told them, this is my country. If God decides I die here, then he decides. Mercy and Munir Amira met Tagore when he was a customer and they were cooks at the sandwich bar in Modi'in. When they could not get a lift from a supervisor or co-worker, he would give them a ride home. When the unrest began late last September, Israeli troops sealed off Palestinian areas, and the brothers were unable to work in Modi'in, so they decided to set up their own restaurant at their side of the divide. With help from the sandwich bar's owner, who gave them kitchen and restaurant equipment, and from Tagore, who ferried the equipment from Modi'in to Neelan for free, they succeeded. A week ago Thursday, on opening day, Tagore bought a Coke. He paid for it with a 100 shekel bill worth $25 and would not accept change. It was nothing out of the ordinary. Yesterday, dust blowing along the main street of Neelan already had mostly obscured the stain where Tagore's blood had flowed onto the concrete floor, but anger among the people of the street was unabated. He was like my brother, my father, said Mustafa Amira, 33, the owner of the fruit and vegetable stand next to the new restaurant. He's not a relative of the restaurant owners, but he's a member of their extended clan. He helped us. He respected us. We respected him, Mustafa Amira said. Hamas, Fatah, I don't know who killed him. I know they are a gang. He was our outlet to Israel. It will be difficult to find another such person. Sentiments were similar across the Green Line, that's Israel's border, the 1967 original border. Sentiments were similar across the Green Line, the border between pre-1967 Israel and the territories that occupied the Mideast War that year, it reads. Quoting, the extremists do not want peace, said Saki Hayun, 34, owner of a sandwich bar in Modi'in and former employer of the Mir brothers. That's why they kill Arab and Israeli civilians in the road. 90% of the people, both Israelis and Arabs, he said, do not support this. Well, that gives a little glimpse about what ordinary people are like in this place where there's so much effort to pit them against each other. It shows what people naturally tend to do and to create relations of friendship and solidarity despite the religious and ethnic divide. So you might say, well, that was several years ago. But here's an article that came out just November 5th. That was Saturday, this Saturday. From Jenin, West Bank, a Reuters article. A 13-year-old Palestinian boy shot in the head and chest by Israeli soldiers died of his wounds on Saturday, Palestinian officials said. The boy was killed because he had a toy gun, but that's not the point of the story. Al-Khatib's body was transferred to Jenin from an Israeli hospital where he was being treated. Palestinian medics and Palestinian security source said. The boy's father, Ismail al-Khatib, told Israeli television before the body was moved that his family had decided to donate Ahmad's organs to Israeli children who needed them. We want to send a message of peace to Israeli society, to the defense ministry, and the Israeli parliament, he said. Continuing to quote, they, Israeli forces, killed my son who was helping, and we want to give his organs to those who need them. I mean, this is basic solidarity between human beings, which is what could shape a society in what is now Israel-Palestine if it weren't for the fact that there are people who don't want it to happen. And I would like to keep this image of ordinary people in mind, because they are the heroes. And I'm going to unfortunately have to spend a lot of time talking about people who are the mischief makers and the source of great hardship. But so keep the good in mind. Okay, now I want to talk about an issue raised by the Jewish state in Palestine, namely whether it should exist. It's in the name of anti-racism that people deny the right to exist for a white state, or a black state, or a Christian state, or an Islamic state, or a Mormon state. Nobody says it was racist to oppose the existence of the apartheid state of South Africa. Nobody says that Lincoln and the abolitionists were racist for opposing the existence of the slave-based Confederacy. Nobody was accused of racism for wanting to abolish Hitler's Aryan state. Then what should an anti-racist think about a Jewish state? What exactly is a Jewish state? Are KKK, Ku Klux Klan statements okay when the word white is replaced with the word Jew? Well, let's take a look at that. I'm going to pass out little slips of paper. On these slips of paper are two quotes. One of them is from a group called White Revolution. They have some people who came to Somerville who have been doing some work to get a resolution on the ballot to divest from Israel. They're ultra-white supremacists. Their latest article uses, like all of them do, uses the word N-I-G-G-E-R prolifically, refers to Rosa Parks and says, good riddance to the N-I-G-G-E-R, Rosa Parks. You get the idea, right? One of them is from their webpage saying what their goal is. The other quote is from a book called The Jewish State by Theodor Herzl, published in 1896. Theodor Herzl is the founder of the Zionist movement. That's the movement whose goal was to create a Jewish state. It's a quote from his book saying what his goal is for the Zionist movement. The Zionist movement is the movement with this goal. So all I've done is I've replaced references to white or to Jewish with the phrase white/Jewish, so you can't tell. And the pronouns refer, we, our, us, in the sense refer to either whites or Jews, but you can't tell. Other than that, take a look at these. And here, you'll just pass these out. And let's see if we can tell which is the extremely racist one and which is the one saying what the goals of the Jewish state movement is. And let me know if anyone here can say with certainty which is which. So one of them says, we must secure the existence of white/Jewish people and a future for white/Jewish children, and a secure white/Jewish homeland is a prerequisite for that achievement. The other one says, let the sovereignty be granted white/Jews over a portion of the globe large enough to satisfy the rightful requirements of a nation. The rest we shall manage for ourselves. Well, is there anybody here who's certain which is which? Yeah?
Well, I think I'm certain.
What?
I think number one is the Jewish Zionist.
You think number one is the Zionist? And are you certain, or are you just sort of, that's your guess?
Well, I can't be certain. I would only be certain if I had read it.
Right,
in
right.
Herzl's
That's your
book,
guess, okay.
which I have.
Anyone else have an opinion? Actually, number two is the Zionist one. Number one is from the ultra-racist White Revolution group. So the question that this raises, I think, is, why is it that we're accused of being a racist if we support the one, but we're accused of being a bigot, an anti-Semite, if we don't support the other. It's something to think about. Let's think about it a little bit more. I'd like to read to you from some passages from an article in Haaretz newspaper. That's the Israeli newspaper, the equivalent to the New York Times. The headline is "A Jewish Demographic State." Now that's a play on words, because in Israel, Israel is officially, quote, a Jewish and democratic state. That's official in Israel law and so forth. So the headline is "A Jewish Demographic State." This is from 2002. Can Israel be a Jewish and democratic state? Is there any such animal? Well, there's this professor, Arnon Sofer, sent a letter to the Prime Minister Sharon saying, most of the inhabitants of Israel realize that there is only one solution in the face of our insane and suicidal neighbor: separation. He says, in the absence of separation, the meaning of such a majority of Arabs is the end of the Jewish state of Israel. The article says that transfer, meaning transfer of the non-Jewish population out of Israel, transfer has now sprouted as a legitimate outlook. In recent months, a permanent team has been meeting at the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, headed by Dr. Shimson Zelniker and run by lawyer Gilead Shir and Major General Uri Sagi. The team is examining the various separation plans with the aim of forming a crystallized joint opinion. Separation has to be between populations, says one of the members of the team. The article says the definition of non-Jewish Israeli citizens, or even Palestinians, in the territories, defining them as a, quote, problem or as a demographic threat, makes use of racist language. It is no longer possible to seek refuge in banal statements like, quote, there is no contradiction between a Jewish and a democratic state, says the author of this article. People avoid discussing the issue as they are aware of the fact that behind, quote, the demographic issue, unquote, there are masses of people whose very existence is defined as a problem. All kinds of proposals are being tossed around in the Knesset, that's the Israeli parliament, and elsewhere. One of these is National Union Yisrael Betinu, MK, member of Knesset, Avigdor Lieberman's plan to expel from the country any Arab who refuses to sign a loyalty oath to Israel when he gets his identity card. Transfer now, a placard that is now posted on every empty wall throughout the country, is the decisive answer from one side. There were those who believed that the ethnic cleansing of 1948 solved the problem. Notice that the phrase ethnic cleansing of 1948 is common parlance in the New York Times of Israel now. It's denied that it even happens in discourse in this country, and we'll talk about it in more detail. Notice that it's accepted just as a fact that is talked about, not a controversial assertion. There were those who believed that ethnic cleansing of 1948 solved the problem. Now they are discovering to their dismay a reality in which the Jews will always be a minority in the Middle East. By they, Raz Krakowskin means the Israeli left. As he sees it, the left's view of the world is based on a demographic principle just like the worldview of transfer. Quoting him, the peace discourse of the Israeli left, in fact, proposes getting rid of the Arabs, and therefore it sounds exactly like the talk of transfer. What this is referring to is that the Peace Now movement says get out of the occupied territories so that we can have a Jewish state which is all Jewish and get the non-Jews out of it. That's the left, the peace group point of view. Okay, that's the discourse in Haaretz, the New York Times. So now, here's another little test our skills thing. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 quotes. Again, I'm disguising the race or the ethnic group. And the question is, which is the Zionist and which is the KKK? In this case, it is literally the KKK. It's either a Zionist quote or it's from David Duke, one of the main leaders of the Ku Klux Klan in the United States. Here's the first one. Our clear goal must be the advancement of the white race, Jewish people, and separation of the white and black races or the Jewish and non-Jewish people. Quote number 1. Quote number 2. Immigration, along with non-white or Arab birth rates, will make white, Jewish people a minority, totally vulnerable to the political, social, and economic will of blacks, Arabs. A social upheaval is now beginning to occur that will be the funeral dirge of the America or Israel we love. I shudder to contemplate the future under non-white or non-Jewish occupation. Quote number 3. What we really want to do is to be left alone. We don't want blacks, Arabs around. We don't need blacks, Arabs around. We're not asking, we don't want to have them, for our culture. We simply want our own country and our own society. That's in no way exploitative at all. We want our own society, our own nation. Last quote, number 4. We have clashing interests with the blacks, Arabs, everywhere. And these interests will go and clash increasingly. And once again, the answer from inside me is heard. Only population transfer and evacuating this country so it would be exclusively for us is the solution. Can anyone tell which is which? Akil.
The number 2 and number 4 are very close to the Zionists, but I go with number 4 to the Zionists and the rest of the KKK.
Well, you're right, 4 is, but 2 isn't.
But they are very close. If you read 2,
Yeah.
it is very close to number 4.
Well, the point I'm trying to make is that it's hard to tell which is the Ku Klux Klan person and which is the Zionist person. The Zionist person for number 4 was Joseph Weitz. In his diary, March 18, 1941, he was the director of the Jewish National Fund's Land Settlement Department from 1932 to 1948. Now, Einstein opposed a Jewish state. Albert Einstein, one of the leading Jewish intellectuals and world leaders, he said it was wrong. You can't say he was an anti-Semite or a Jewish self-hater because, in 1952, the Israeli government offered him the honorary position of president of Israel. So, he's got his credentials as being, no enemy of Jews. But he said it was wrong. And I'm going to pass this out. But these are the things he said. In 1938 at the Commodore Hotel, he said, I should much rather see reasonable agreement with the Arabs on the basis of living together in peace than the creation of a Jewish state. Okay, well, that was before the Holocaust. Maybe he changed his mind. January 1946. in reply to the question of whether refugee settlement in Palestine demanded a Jewish state before one of the commissions. He told the Anglo-American Committee of Inquiry, quote, "The state idea is not according to my heart. I cannot understand why it is needed. It is connected with narrow-minded and economic obstacles. I believe it is bad. I have always been against it." Now, Alfred Lilienthal wrote an interesting book, What Price Israel? He lived during the period when the UN partition plan was voted on, and he was involved in diplomatic circles. He writes, he recounts that on April 1st, 1952, in a message to the Children of Palestine Incorporated, Einstein spoke of the necessity to curb a kind of nationalism which has arisen in Israel, if only to permit a friendly and fruitful coexistence with the Arabs. Lilienthal also relates a personal conversation with Einstein. Quote, Lilienthal says, "Dr. Einstein told me that, strangely enough, he had never been a Zionist and had never favored the creation of the State of Israel. Also, he told me of a significant conversation with Chaim Weizmann, who was the leader of the World Zionist Organization. Einstein had asked him, what about the Arabs if Palestine were given to the Jews? And Weizmann said, what Arabs? They are hardly of any consequence." Take a look at this. So why is it that those who agree with Einstein today are accused of bigotry, being an anti-Semite? They're accused of this by the Boston Globe, by the Republican and Democratic Party, by Larry Summers, the president of Harvard, who said it's anti-Semitic to oppose Israel, and of course by the Jewish organization, the Anti-Defamation League. Okay, and let me just relate to another little topical thing that happened recently, because people maybe wrote about the furor of the Iranian president calling for wiping Israel off the face of the map. Now, as I said earlier, I'm against ethnically defined states, and certainly the Iranian state. I'm not supporting the Iranian, state because I think it's anti-democratic. But what's interesting is the furor that erupted over the statement, and I think we need to put some perspective on this issue of wiping things off the face of the map. Is it always wrong to wipe a country off the face of the map? We talked about apartheid state of South Africa, the Nazi Third Reich, the Confederacy. They were all wiped off the face of the map. Was it right to wipe Palestine off the face of the map and replace it with a Jewish state? So just to make the point, I've got some maps here. You can see that Palestine used to be on the face of the map. Palestine used to be a country. It was on the face of the map. You have to look for it, but it's there. Palestine. Mandated Palestine. Go on. It's been wiped off the face of the map. So why the hysteria when it's Palestine that's been wiped off the face of the map for real and replaced with a Jewish state, which comes right out of the Ku Klux Klan as far as its ideological orientation? Why the hysteria when someone talks about wiping a Ku Klux Klan defined Jewish state off the face of the map? It's something to think about. Another thing to think about, why is this a taboo subject? Everything we're talking about right now is a taboo subject in American discourse. I've been have asked every dean of every school at Harvard University, plus the director of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies, the Carr Center for Public Policy and Human Rights, the Harvard Center for Health and Human Rights, all of them, I said, you should have a symposium on the question, should there be a Jewish state in Palestine? Because it's at the root of the whole conflict in the Middle East, which is one of the major conflicts in the world. Harvard University is supposed to look at the root question of these kinds of things. Well, that's certainly worthy of a symposium where people present both sides. They share their opinions and the facts that are based on them with their colleagues and the public. They won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. None of them. All sorts of excuses. They're all online. You can read them. If you ask me, I'll show you. You can read all the emails. Okay? Boston Globe will not publish an op-ed that I sent them. They told me they wouldn't publish it, called "Is it Anti-Semitic to Oppose a Jewish State?" Making the point that Einstein did, making these points. They won't publish it. The city of Somerville won't allow this question to go on the ballot. But we have 4,500 signatures. More than 10% of registered voters in Somerville have signed that petition to put on the ballot. The city says it's too controversial, and they got a judge to bang the gavel and say that's right. Won't put it on the ballot. They won't allow a respected forum to entertain the question, should there be a Jewish state in Palestine? They don't want the question to achieve even the dignity of being respectable, never mind to have a negative answer applied to it. Okay, some people say, in discussing this, and I've had lots of conversations about it, and of course collecting signatures in the petition. Some people say, well, the Jews need a state where they're a majority, even if it requires ethnic cleansing. And some people say, well, Israel may do bad things, but it's anti-Semitic to single Israel out. I mean, other countries do bad things. Why are you singling Israel out? That's something you hear. In my talk, what's the fight time? We'll address these questions. But something else people say is also important to deal with first. Sometimes people say, so what? Why does any of this about something far away in the Middle East have any, why is it of any great importance to us here, Somerville, or Walpole, or Massachusetts? And the answer that I want to give to that before I start with the rest of my talk is that it's important to understand why our government supports Israel so unconditionally, and whether it's right or wrong for it to do so. And it's important to understand that in order to understand our own society and the causes of and the solutions to the problems in our lives, in our own backyards. So that's why I think understanding this is important. Okay. My talk's proposition is that the establishment discourse on Israel and Palestine is wrong. And I'd like to discuss what I think that discourse is. It's got 5 main parts to it. The establishment discourse says, 1, there should be a Jewish state in Palestine. There was the Holocaust. They need a Jewish state. Gentiles, the non-Jewish people, according to the Zionists, they're all anti-Semitic under the skin. You scratch them, and you see they're anti-Semitic. So the Jews need a Jewish state. The Zionists say the Jews cannot live safely as equals among Gentiles. They need a state where they're the majority. And they say it's anti-Semitic to oppose a Jewish state. So the first point in the establishment discourse is, yes, there needs to be a Jewish state, and you're not even allowed to utter an opposing suspicion that maybe that's not true. That's a given. Okay, the second point is that the cause of the violence in the Middle East is that there are 2 different peoples fighting over the same land, and that because of that, there's no real solution possible. keep in mind the taxi driver in the town that cried over his death when you consider what the establishment discourse is saying. The discourse on this topic is that world leaders are doing their best for a peaceful resolution, a two-state solution, but hey, it's an intractable problem. These people just hate each other. They're fighting over the same land. What can you expect? The third point in the establishment discourse is that the aspirations of ordinary Palestinians and ordinary Jews are just flat out contradictory. It's related to the previous point. The fourth point, the rulers of the United States, despite their flaws, are fundamentally for democracy, for equality, and for making the world safe from terrorism. And that is why the United States supports Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East and an innocent nation defending itself from terrorist attacks. And the fifth point in the discourse is never usually said explicitly, but it's implicit. And it's why this discussion tonight is important for us. The fifth point is that the common sense thing for Americans to do, given that our leaders fight for freedom and democracy, is to appreciate the fact that we live in a democracy. That's the subtext. Now I'm going to propose a very different framework for understanding what's happening in Palestine, Israel, and the U.S. support of Israel. Number one, Jews do not need a state, Jewish majority, to be safe, any more than blacks need a black state to be safe, or Mormons need a Mormon state to be safe. Are Jews, who are 2.5% of the American population, are Jews unsafe in the United States because they're not a majority? Now, the only way to prevent racists like the Nazis from coming to power is to oppose racism in all its forms, to build relations of solidarity between ordinary people of different races and ethnicities. There should not be a Jewish state in Palestine because it's based on ethnic cleansing, it's racist, it's apartheid, it's morally wrong. An Aryan state, a Muslim state, and a Jewish state are wrong. So that's my answer to the first point. The second point, despite current fears and distrust, and of course those are, the nth degree right now because of things powerful people have done, the aspirations, the desires of ordinary Israeli Jews and ordinary Palestinians are fundamentally the same. They want to live in peace, they want to have security, they want to be able to raise their families and their children, have good education, have decent jobs. They're the same. And these aspirations, as I'll discuss in more detail, are the opposite of what the rulers from the United States, the Arab rulers and the Jewish rulers want. It's elite social control measures which are the true cause of 5 decades of conflict and violence in the Middle East. Let me just elaborate on that. In the U.S. and in the Middle East, the elites all want to keep ordinary people out of power. Their strategy for doing that is to foment an Orwellian ethnic war between Jews and Arabs. Israel's blatant oppression of Palestinians is functional. There might be Jewish Zionists, Jewish nationalist fanatics who have religious, fanatical, fundamentalist reasons for doing it. But the question is, why do they get support from the United States government? And the answer to that question is that these policies that attack Palestinians are functional because they help to foment this ethnic war, which is an elite social control strategy. So that Israel attacks Arabs in the name of the Jews. That's very functional. It's very useful to have the Star of David flag being waved over the armed forces that are attacking Palestinians. It's very similar to what happened in the former Yugoslavia, where the rulers in Serbia and Croatia deliberately provoked and fomented an ethnic war there by attacking civilians of one ethnic group in the name of the other. And there's a really excellent book, The Myth of Ethnic War, which discusses that in some detail. It's a very parallel situation. It's not unsimilar to what Bush and Cheney in this country are doing to control us. They're putting us into the middle of a war on terror where it's Americans versus, quote, anti-Americans. And it justifies the Patriot Act and all sorts of draconian measures that otherwise we would put up with. The dictatorships in Iran and Saudi Arabia and Iraq under Saddam Hussein, Egypt, they use Israel as a lightning rod for class struggle, to divert anger that would otherwise be diverted against the elite dictatorships, to divert it against the other ethnic group. So an example of something to think about in that light is that the Saudi Arabian government has had enormous wealth at its disposal, of course. You know, the royal family is vastly wealthy. Now, there's a group called AIPAC. It's the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. It's the main organization of the so-called Jewish lobby, and they're famous for using their money to fund politicians to run against any politician who is anti-Israel. Well, the question is, so how come the Saudi royal family doesn't do the opposite, to fund politicians to run against people that are pro-Israel? They claim to be staunch supporters of Palestinians. I saw the royal prince was here in the United States recently on television. He was saying, you know, he's standing up for the rights of Palestinians and no peace unless blah, blah, blah. But they don't actually do anything equivalent to the Jewish lobby to tilt the United States against Israel. And I think the reason is because they tacitly appreciate the value of Israel in fomenting an ethnic war, because they have a problem and need to control their population, and it's extremely useful for them to have some credibility as championing the Arabs against the Jews. So they look what they do with their money, not what they do with their mouth. The other thing to ask is, how come it's been 5 decades and the leaders of all the governments, including the United States, have never been able to broker a peace? I think the only sensible explanation is that they don't want a peace. They've never wanted a peace. It's all been pretend. That's why the United States, supports Israel so unconditionally. So the reason the United States government is supporting Israel is not because it's the only democracy in the Middle East, not because it's an innocent nation defending itself from terrorism, but because of the lightning rod role it plays for class struggles. It provokes Arab anger, and that's its function. And in order for Israel to do this, it has to be strong. And that's why the U.S. supports it so unconditionally. Not only does it have to be strong, it has to be so strong that it gives the Arab dictatorships a credible excuse for not really doing anything militarily against Israel. And of course, we know Israel has nuclear bombs. It's widely known in the Middle East. And so the governments like the Saudi family and the Egyptians can rant and rail against Israel and get legitimacy and divert anger and so forth. And they also can say, well, of course, we can't actually attack Israel now because it's got nuclear bombs and so on and so forth. So that's why the U.S. does what it does. And so what does this mean for us? I think the common sense thing for Americans and for people in the Middle East to do, given that we have no real democracy, and by that I mean that our rulers use lies to control us with these horrible ethnic wars. That's what I mean by no real democracy. So the common sense thing for us to do, given this problem, is to make a democratic revolution, to make our societies be based on the values of ordinary people like the taxi driver and his friends, to make it be based on those values throughout the world. based on the values of democracy and equality and solidarity. Now, I could go on. I have a speech prepared with documents and everything, so I could go on, but I think it's 8:25, and what I perceived of as my introduction will be my talk. But I think we should have a good discussion with questions and answers. Please go if you want to, and I'll refer to some documents with you that way.
Yeah. Are you acknowledging me?
Yeah.
Okay. It's not clear to me what the rationale would be to say that Israel exists in order to foment the Arabs. Why? What's the goal of that? I missed that. What's the purpose?
Well, the goal, I think, is basically this. The wealth of the Middle East, which is oil wealth and some other resources, that wealth is currently possessed by a relatively small elite group of people. American corporations, Saudi royal families, upper classes in the Middle Eastern countries. But there is an enormous class struggle going on in the Middle East. There are strikes and hunger strikes in Egypt. There are demonstrations and building takeovers, which I could read to you from. I brought a lot of examples of this. There's enormous anger by the working people in the Middle East. And if the working people were to succeed in making a democratic social revolution so that all this wealth was shared among the people in the region used for their benefit instead of these upper classes, it would be a disaster. So how do you stop that if you're an upper class strategist? And it's a fact that one of the main forms of social control is to pit people against each other, to pit ordinary people against each other along racial, ethnic, religious lines. And that's what they've done in the Middle East. They've created a framework in which Jews and Arabs are pitted against each other. There's a lot of emotion, fear, and in some cases hatred. And it's been, unfortunately, it's been successful. You can't have, let me give an example. In 1997 was the period when Oslo was the negotiated settlement that gave people in Israel a sense that maybe there was going to be peace. And 1997 was a period when people thought, more than lately now, that there was going to be peace. What happened in 1997? In 7 days of December, there was a general strike of the Israeli population that shut Israel down, completely shut it down. The issue was the pensions that the government was threatening to take away from ordinary Israelis. And it was a massive general strike. And the government tried to say that the people on strike were more dangerous than the bombers. The Treasury Secretary said that, and so forth. The elite in Israel only can really control the Jewish population when they have the Jewish population at war with the Arabs. And they know it. And when peace threatens, they have things like a general strike. And there have been other strikes after that. People going to Israel know that this is something that happens. This is basic social control, and the thing is that people like us, we don't think about it. We don't think that way because we're good people. We don't think about how to control people by getting them to fight each other. That's not part of our lifestyle, but it is the way that upper class people are trained and experienced. And they do it, and they're good at it, unfortunately.
So you're saying that it's a distraction to keep the populace from paying attention to their own self.
Yeah, and when you listen, the Ku Klux Klan, was functioned to attack solidarity of American working people. In the 1930s, the Southern Tenant Farm Workers Union formed in Arkansas, Mississippi, all throughout the South, in the Cotton Belt, where cotton was grown mainly. And they formed a union, and black and white tenant farmers were meeting together and formed together in this union. And it was the Klan that attacked them. The Klan that said you can't have meetings of black and white together as they were doing and so forth. The Klan mentality is promoted by the upper class to attack solidarity among ordinary people because they fear such solidarity. And Israel is basically the Ku Klux Klan writ large. And that's what it is. And it's playing exactly the same role in the Middle East that the Klan played in the South.
John, I remember when there was one point where on the Palestinian side, there was a fairly large group of people who were dissenting against Arafat and the corruption of the wall. Wasn't it about that time that when all of a sudden, I forget who did what first, when Sharon came in power and that fostered immediately, the Palestinian Jewish retaliations, which again inflamed the whole situation. It was almost seemed like Arafat himself was fostering that to protect his own place as equally as Sharon was doing it.
It's true that Arafat and the PLO are corrupt. Everyone knows it. It's not controversial. The number of millionaires has grown in the midst of this incredible poverty in the refugee camps in Gaza and so forth. The number of millionaires has grown. People are angry, and that's one of the main weaknesses of the Palestine Authority and the Palestine Liberation Organization. But it's only control over the Palestinian population is its claim to represent them against Israel. Take that away, and they have nothing. People put up with the corruption and so forth because they feel they need someone who can stand up against Israel, although they're not really standing up against Israel. The other thing is that I have it here. I just have to find in my outline where it is and reference it. But there's a UPI article that discusses the fact that starting in the 70s, Israel backed Hamas because they wanted their enemy to be defined as religious fundamentalists rather than the more secular. The PLO was secular, until it backed down under pressure under the Clinton administration. The PLO said it wanted a democratic state for all of Palestine where everyone would be equal, and it was a secular organization. And Israel knew that would be very attractive to a lot of people. And so it wanted its enemy to be characterized as the way Hamas was, as a religious fundamentalist. So it started giving aid secretly to Hamas. That's the kind of stuff that goes on. It's extremely manipulative, and it's why we should understand that it's not only an attack on the people in the Middle East. It's part of the same social control mechanism which is an attack on us in this room. There have to be more questions. Otherwise, I'll continue my talk.
What would you see as a solution to the problem? Would you want a single secular democratic state or a two-state solution there?
I think that the solution in the Middle East would be, yes, a single state in the region that was known as Palestine, where everyone would be equal. But that really doesn't completely answer the question, because if equality was simply sort of formal equality under the law, you'd have class inequality, obviously, and I think that's at the root of the problem, because upper classes foment these wars to people against each other to control. So we need to solve the problem of class inequality, and that calls for, that's why I said right at the beginning, that we need a social revolution to reshape society on the basis of equality and democracy and solidarity, which is the opposite of the way it's shaped now from the top down, which is the main value is not people supporting each other, but people competing against each other. Competition is the god that is worshipped by secular capitalism. And it's the opposite of people supporting each other, like the taxi driver and the people in the village. So it's more than just formal equality. We need to have the values of ordinary people triumph for a change, and that would be nothing less than a revolution.
Yeah, would you ascribe the same sort of motives that you described for basically Palestine to the rhetoric that was coming out of Iran and the president in Iran last week?
Yeah.
Or is he truly just
calling
a spade a spade?
I think that yes, the Iranian ruling class now would of course like to be identified as the champion of the all the Muslim people in the Middle East against the Israeli government that's attacking them, and they would like for that legitimacy to cloud over the fact that they're horribly anti-working class in terms of what they do to the working people of Iran. And so yes, I think that's definitely part of it. But there is another sort of maybe more immediate explanation that I read about. I don't know if I agree with it or not, but it's plausible that they wanted to, that the timing of doing it now, saying wipe Israel off the face of the map, was because they wanted to remind the Middle Eastern world that they are championing, the Muslim population, and they want the United States to be afraid that if the U.S. attacks Iran now, it will be perceived by the whole world as not stopping nuclear proliferation, but an attack on Muslim people. I don't know, that might have been responsible for the timing. The basic strategy, of course, is to frame the conflict as Jews versus Arabs, or Jews versus Muslims, and to obscure the real conflict, which in Israel is things like people having their pension taken away, for which reason they go and strike against the Israeli government. And in Egypt and Saudi Arabia and the other Middle Eastern governments, the real issue is really, it's the same kind of things that we're experiencing here. Massive layoffs, privatization, loss of health care, huge unemployment, the solution to which is struggle against the wealthy upper class people to control the government and society in these places, not, killing some Jewish cab driver, crying out loud. So the elites are trying to frame things so that they stay in power. And so yes, the answer is yes.
Would you say that Islamic fundamentalism is a red herring?
Well, I think that my opinion is that the United States ruling class is promoting Islamic fundamentalism because they want the world to be, they want conflict in the world to be framed as Islamic fundamentalism versus, the U.S. rulers, because both of them are anti-democratic. They want people to feel that their only choice is between one version of an anti-democratic, anti-working class authoritarian power versus another one. That's what they, I think, want. I mean, there are obviously detours and flips and flops, but I mean, look, Osama bin Laden was one of the main. He was backed by the United States. The tunnels that he was hiding in he was commissioned by the U.S. government to build those tunnels. And the Taliban's textbooks were printed in the University of Nebraska. So,
What's the new Cold War? The new Cold War.
yeah, the Cold War, when the Cold War ended, they needed another boogeyman to provide the excuse for all the social domination strategies, and they took a while for them to land on it, but they seem to have landed on the boogeyman being terrorism, Islamofascism, whatever they want to call it, and that's what they're doing.
Not to take our eye off the subject at hand, but there was a very interesting piece in the op-ed page of the Globe today, chronicling the career of our Vice President, Dick Cheney. And, he goes way back to the Ford administration and what have you. And, the premise is that, he really fought against the end of the Cold War because he just, we needed this Cold War to keep our eyes on the ball. And there's been a lot of effort personified in Dick Cheney, but obviously the military-industrial complex. There's been a lot of effort into just, finding that new Cold War that'll keep people riled up.
Scott, are there any groups in Israel who have been successful in mass movements or trying to oppose the Israeli government?
Well, there are a number of groups. They have their strengths and their weaknesses. First of all, there's the refuseniks. About 500, I think, military soldiers who refused to serve in the occupied territories. And some of them have spoken in the United States, and I've heard two of them speak. One of them had, I thought, a terrible line. His line was, the occupation is bad because it corrupts the pure Jewish state. And we need to get out of the business of occupying so that we can have our pure Jewish state. Well, it's discriminatory. I have all the discriminatory laws here that I didn't have time to get into, but just to touch on it, the way the draft works in Israel is that they have a draft board, but it's different than it was in the United States. The draft board selects who they will draft. It's not like everyone gets a lottery or everyone is drafted. And with the exception of a few minorities who are not Jewish, like the Druze, they only select Jews to be drafted. Okay, so what? Well, then there's all of these laws that use service in the Israeli military as the criterion for eligibility for child support, housing, education, scholarships, and so forth. And you might say, well, yeah, that's bad, but they did serve, right? The veterans, right? But then the laws spread it out. It isn't that you have to be a member. It isn't that you have to have served. You have to be related to someone who served, their brother, their sister, and so forth. So the way the law works is that if you're Jewish, you're eligible, and if you're not Jewish, you're not. And it's for a whole host of benefits that are fundamental benefits that are tied to service in the Israeli military. Another thing, there's the law of return. Any Jew can return, quote, return, as if they ever were there before, can, quote, return to Israel and automatically be given citizenship and full rights and benefits and so forth. Mortgage, it's waived and stuff like that. And if you're not Jewish, it's a very difficult procedure, and you may or may not be allowed to go to Israel. But there are other benefits, like the amount of tax that you have to pay when you import something. It depends on whether you're eligible for the right of return or not. So, the whole thing is just permeated with what we would call Jim Crow laws. Sometimes, often disguised, because the actual law refers to something else, which refers to something else, and you have to go through layers until you get to the part that introduces the actual discrimination against non-Jews, but it's there. So I forget the main point I was answering.
But these laws have all been passed by the Israeli parliament, right? They've been passed democratically.
Oh, yeah.
And I understand that although it's essential to have a Jewish state, it's not essential to have a Jewish constitution, which would include the Bill of Rights, such as we enjoy here.
There is no constitution. There are basic laws which are discriminatory. Let's see, I'm looking, oh, here, there's a group, I was talking about, answering the question about the resistance. So there was this guy who was one of the refuseniks, but he had a bad line, I thought. He was sort of defend the racist state of Israel. Another refusenik spoke, and I asked him what he thought the solution was, and he said, yeah, it should be one state where everyone's equal. So there's differences of opinion there. Then there's this group, Breaking the Silence, which is, these are people who did serve in the occupation, but who have now spoken about what they did and how wrong it was, how their orders, describing in detail how their orders were just to kill people who were innocent, who hadn't shot or done anything like that. One of them talks, about how the checkpoints, that completely obstruct people's lives. You can't go from point A to point B to work, to school, to a hospital without being stopped, sometimes for hours and hours and hours, and sometimes never even being allowed through, capriciously, by these 18-year-old, Israeli soldiers who get orders. One day stop them, the other day don't stop them, or just play with them, and they describe this. They say that, there's this one checkpoint the soldier's talking about, there's a known way that the terrorists, if they want to be a terrorist and get through, can get through, but they're stopping people, and the guy is saying that basically what it amounts to is that if you want to be a terrorist, you have to make a left here and then turn right here. But if you don't want to be a terrorist, you have to take this enormous detour that's going to take you just hours and hours and hours. And it has nothing to do with stopping terrorism. It has to do with harassing people to basically humiliate them, to control them, and to probably make them want to leave. Because the whole idea is the Ku Klux Klan goal, making them leave. So there's these soldiers who are speaking out. It's called Breaking the Silence. And I heard them talk. That's where I bought this. At the Harvard Law School, a couple of them spoke. And one of them described how he said, they had a slideshow. And one of them said, this is a school that was in an elevated part of the land overlooking the town and the occupied territory where they were stationed. And the view from the school is this, you can see the whole town just laid out in front of them. And he says, what happens is maybe someone shoots a gun from somewhere. You don't know where, right? And he says the orders come to lob mortar shells just indiscriminately at the town, at people's homes, just killing people and destroying homes. And he says, how is this reported in the Israeli press? He says, it's reported this way. The Israeli soldiers were fired on and they returned fire. So the image that people are getting in reading the Israeli newspaper is that someone shot at them and they shot back at them. But he said the fact is, it's it's collective punishment. Is what it is. It's massive collective punishment. So there are Israelis who are speaking out that way. Then there's Ian Pape, who's a professor at the University of Haifa, I think, who has called for a boycott, international boycott of Israel. And there almost was one in Britain. The teachers' union did call a boycott, and then pro-Israel people challenged to revote, and so it lost. But he was supporting the boycott against Israel. But he's an isolated person. There's not a whole lot of people like him. So I think that the situation that's been created in Israel is one where to be really for equality between Jews and non-Jews is defined as being a traitor. That means you're against the existence of a Jewish state. It's defined as being a traitor. And because of that, people who have those feelings, you know, they behave the way people whose ideas are defined as traitors behave. They keep a low profile. I mean, I think there probably are people who don't like the situation, but you know, to question the legitimacy of a Jewish state is not something you can do easily in Israel. Although the article I read, you can see that the dilemmas created by it, the fact that it's so obviously racist, is one that people grapple with. But to say, well, the obvious solution is not to have a Jewish state, that's traitors. So I know that's just a partial answer to your question, but it's something.
Part of my question is, do you think that this is changeable from within Israel, or?
Oh,
do you think
that's a good question. I don't think so. I think that if there's massive opposition to government support for Israel, in the United States especially, because it's the U.S. support which makes the Israeli government able to do what it does. But you know, around the world, if that were to occur, then I think that it would lead maybe to a situation which is like what happened in South Africa, where the upper class in South Africa, they're still in power. And conditions, by the way, for working class Africans are actually worse now than they were under apartheid by many metrics. And there are general strikes in Africa, gold miners and so forth. It's not like things are all great in South Africa, but the upper class in South Africa, because of the worldwide condemnation of the apartheid regime, is just beyond the pale, unacceptable racism. They made a calculation that they would not be able to maintain control, the minimum amount of legitimacy, unless they abolished the apartheid aspect of their control. So they did. They went to Nelson Mandela, they brought him out of jail, they had a referendum. By the way, 70% of the whites voted for the referendum to abolish the apartheid system. So I think that it's conceivable that something like that would cause the Israeli rulers to say, look, at this idea of a Jewish state, it's no longer tenable. It's denounced by so much of the world population that we can't rely on it in the future. But then it would be like South Africa. It would still be the class control and equality, and that would have to be dealt with. I'm not saying that it would be a quick solution, but it just doesn't look like opposition to the Ku Klux Klan aspect of Israel has organized, clear presence right now in Israel. I wish it did, but I don't see it. And I don't claim to know exactly why. It could be that people are just afraid to speak out, that they exist, or that the fear is so intense that there's a lack of rationality, because, you know, it's true. There's suicide bombers, you know, that killed random Jews at bus stops, which is wrong. You know, people ask me about that. I say, look, in 1831 in the United States, there was a slave rebellion, Nat Turner slave rebellion, and they killed white children, and that was wrong. But anyone who would have said, therefore, we have to support slavery in the United States would be 10 times more wrong. And I think the Israeli government uses the suicide bombing. I think that they know that it benefits them, it gives them more power over the people. And because if they didn't want to have suicide bombing, they would stop being a Ku Klux Klan nation. That would eliminate any of the support that exists among Palestinians for suicide bombing. The only reason suicide bombers have any support for killing random Jews, as opposed to soldiers, people who really are oppressing them. The only reason they have any support is because it's the Star of David flag, which is waving over this horribly oppressive regime. You know, so. But so I'm pessimistic about it coming from Israel. I think we need to tell our government stop supporting Israel.
Do you think the Americans are educated about the problem between the Jewish and Arab community, so-called Israel, or the way I say it is Palestine? And if they are not educated about what's going on, how to educate them, knowing that the media has been controlled by people who are pro-Israel, million percent instead of 100%.
Yeah.
So how?
That's a good question.
How do you reach?
It's true. It's true.
American, and the reason why I say American, we focus on American because American picture to the world, including Canada, is that. And I know it's not because I've been living here for 13 years. I know it's good, and that's why I've been living here. So how can we change the image to the world and at the same time educate the American people, which is our
that's a good question. I think what's happening in Somerville is the best answer to that question that I've seen. In Somerville, a number of people have been putting in a lot of time over the last couple of years, going door to door in residential areas of Somerville, door to door, talking to people about these issues. And lately, we asked people to sign a petition to put a question on the ballot, on the Somerville ballot, to divest, so people could vote to divest from Israel or not. They've had films, in the church and some talks and so forth. It's true, we don't have the mass media. We don't even have, you can't even get a university like Harvard to have a symposium on the question. So we've got to just go directly to the people. But if we can succeed in something like what Somerville Investment Project is trying to do, to get a question on the ballot, and if we can get a sizable number, not even necessarily a majority, well, a majority would be nice, to vote for something like divestment from Israel, I think this begins to tell the world, this becomes the kind of news that people hear about, that tells the world that ordinary Americans don't agree with their government. And ordinary Americans, when they at least start to get information that's true about the situation, think that Ku Klux Klan states are wrong. And so I think we have to rely on the things that we do control to communicate with the rest of the world. And it's hard. I mean, towns having referenda, questions getting supported. I don't know. Maybe you can think of other things. It's an important thing to do, and it's not easy to come up with all different ways to do it.
I have one more question. Have you ever been accused by being unpatriotic?
Unpatriotic? Personally, I've been accused of being an anti-Semite when I've been doing this. Not anti-patriotic, not yet.
Are you expected? Do you have any expectation, something you might, based on what you do?
Actually, my personal experience is that people don't attack me. I've passed out leaflets on this at Harvard. 1,800 of them where I work, almost everyone at the Harvard School of Public Health. A sharp leaflet saying there should not be a Jewish state, and why. And a couple of individuals, expressed their disgust at what I was doing. But another Jewish colleague said he disagreed. We had lunch and discussed it. It was friendly, and we're still in friendly terms. No one, to my face, has called me anything. And frankly, I think the reason is that if you base what you're saying on the core values that are positive, and you take that as your starting point, it's very difficult for people to attack you. Because they don't really have an argument. And so I find that the main way that I get attacked is people just want me to go away or to ignore me. I can tell a funny story about what the Harvard dean did to try to stop the leaflets from being passed out. Should I tell the story? I mean, this is just an example of what happens. I wrote this leaflet, and I said to the dean, the dean of academic affairs at Harvard, Jim Ware, I'd like permission to pass this leaflet out. Now, in the 60s, he didn't have to ask permission to pass the leaflet out in the university, but this is the 21st century where everything is a big clamp down. So I said, I'd like to have permission to pass it out. And he said, no, you can't. I said, why not? He said, well, there's not enough room in the building to pass out a leaflet. This is a building where they have book fairs, they have job fairs. It's crazy, right? And I said, well, okay. In that case, if space is a problem, wink, wink, how about if I put it in people's mailboxes? With all the departments have mailboxes. And he says, no, it's because it's not about university business. I said, well, they have engraved on the stone face of the Harvard School of Public Health in 6 languages, the highest attainable standard of health is a fundamental right of every human being. And there are women who can't get to a hospital in childbirth and babies being born and dying because of checkpoints, military checkpoints, that exist only for the purpose of keeping Palestinians from returning to their homes inside the Green Line, where they were driven out. And this leaflet is saying that we should have a symposium to discuss this because people are being denied their human rights that you say are engraved on the wall of the building. No, it said this is not to do with official policy. And it was specifically calling for the Harvard School of Public Health's Center for Health and Human Rights to stand up for Article 13 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says that everyone has the right to return to the country, and the whole idea of a Jewish state is no, they don't. And the Center for Health and Human Rights passes out this document, the Universal Declaration, to every graduating student every year. But no, my leaflet had nothing to do with official university business. So I said, okay, but I've got 3,000 of these printed now, and they all have a little note printed at the bottom that says that permission to distribute this on Harvard University property was denied by Jim Ware, the Dean of Academic Affairs. And I said, I'm going to have, me and my friends, we're going to distribute this leaflet from public property, Huntington Avenue, Longwood Avenue, and so forth, to people as they're entering the building. Sunday, Thanksgiving weekend, I get an email. Dear John, we think that this is a very important issue that needs to be discussed, and we would like you to be able to set up a table and pass out leaflets inside, the building. I said, okay, thank you. The leaflets have already been printed up with the note saying that you wouldn't allow them to be distributed, but I'll put your email where you changed your mind on the table if you want. I said, or if you prefer, you could reprint. You could pay to reprint 3,000 without the note at the bottom. Immediately, John will pay. They did pay. $262 to print 3,000 copies, 2 sides. They did pay. And so what does this mean? I was talking to a colleague of mine who's a Chinese woman, and she has no particular emotional connection to the issue, but she was interested, and she was reading the back and forth, and she said, John, why are they so afraid? And that's exactly it. It's fear. It's pure fear. Deans know that you do not advance your career in this country by allowing someone to pass out a leaflet that discusses the truth about this issue. It's a taboo subject. And it was only because there was a countervailing fear of being exposed as an absolute idiot or a tyrant, you know, not allowing someone to pass a leaflet out on a university, for crying out loud. You know, he realized he'd made a terrible blunder and he had no choice. But asking them to sponsor a symposium, they all come back with we think that this is an important issue, it would be a very good idea, but we're not the appropriate people to do it. At the Center for Middle Eastern Studies, they're the expertise and so forth. They asked the Center for Middle Eastern Studies. I've gone through the whole thing. Well, you know, what we have on our plate is we have a symposium on 1001 Arabian Nights and so forth. This isn't really on our agenda. You should ask the Carr Center for blah, blah, blah. It was all the way around the Mulberry Bush. The Divinity School, all of them, the Kennedy School of Government, the Law School. Not one of the schools of Harvard University will even consider a symposium which would give the question of, you know, is this Jewish state a good idea? Was Einstein crazy, or maybe was he right? It would not dignify the question with a forum, which is a Harvard forum, which is not to say that you can't reserve a room, you know, and talk about it, but to give it the legitimacy of a Harvard forum to tell the public that, you know, this is a legitimate question. This is not just anti-Semitic kooks who think this way. They won't do it. They won't let it be in the ballot. And I think that they've drawn a line in the sand. The rulers in this country, you know, don't give it a forum where it achieves legitimacy. Anyone who opposes a Jewish state is an anti-Semite. End of discussion. And that's where we're at.
I hate to sound cynical, of course, but don't you think it would be instructive to look at their endowment and how it's invested and who their a list of their major donors might be?
Well, sure, that would be interesting. I can tell you one thing I've looked at. The 7 members of the trustees of Harvard University, which is the controlling body, all of them are members of the Council on Foreign Relations, which is the foreign policy elite organization that sets policy in this country.
Mm-hmm. There you have it.
It's interesting, John, I forget which of the denominations, but they had a resolution, it might have been UCC, to also disinvest in Israeli companies.
Right, a number of churches.
And at the very last minute, they watered it down.
Yeah, there's a tremendous pressure. Just to give an example of the pressure, in Somerville, Bob, you can correct me if I get the numbers wrong, but I think it was 7 out of 10?
8 out of 11.
8 out of 11 of the city aldermen had publicly said that they supported the investment from Israel and were about to vote on a resolution that would have the city of Somerville divest. Currently, and for the last 10 years at least, Somerville has purchased and owns Israel government bonds, and the only foreign government bonds that it owns are Israel government bonds. And so these 8 aldermen were about to oppose it. Well, guess what happened? There was the final meeting where it was going to be voted on, where there was someone then said, no, we should have an open hearing on it first, hear both sides. And so they said, okay, fine, we'll have an open hearing. The Israeli consul in Boston came to the meeting. I think Barney Frank came, or he got involved, I know.
Message.
What?
Message.
A message. Capuano, the now congressman, former mayor, the current mayor, by the way, Curtatone, was one of 11 mayors that was sent on Israel's dime, was sent to Israel last summer for a trip, and is extremely opposed to the Somerville Divestment Project, so much so that he's gotten himself in a little trouble by ordering the Arts Festival not to let the Somerville Divestment Project have a table, even though other groups who were collecting signatures for questions were allowed to have a table. So it's like extreme, even to the point of exposing his bias. And who knows what other messages came down on these Somerville aldermen, so that on a dime, all of them except one reversed their position. And what kind of pressure causes that to happen? You know, I think these people were told you're choosing between your career in politics in the United States or support divestment. You decide, or something like that. I mean, I think that's the way it works. It's a key U.S. foreign policy, strategic policy, and those things they do not tolerate opposition to.
Good job. 9:10. So, thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And